Hello, this is Employee a Million, and welcome to the first SpongeBob commentary, or as I call it, a SpongeCom. I'm going to be doing this every time an episode or a set of episodes turns 20 years old, starting with the first pack of episodes in the whole SpongeBob series, Help Wanted, Reef-Blower, and Tea at the Treedome, which came out 20 years ago at the point this is uploaded, May 1st, 1999. That is incredible, and I'm just gonna for these commentaries, I'm just going to be speaking what's on my mind. I've got a few notes, but there's not going to be any editing, so sorry if this first couple ones come out a bit choppy, but hey, I'm learning, and this is what it's good for. And this first episode is Help Wanted, the pilot, written by Stephen Hillenburg, Derek Dryman, and Tim Hill. It was done in 1997, actually, just a year or two after Rocko's Modern Life ended, which Stephen Hillenburg also worked on, and there was a lot of build-up to the conception of Rocko because Stephen had done biology work, marine biology work for schools, and then he did Rocko in the 90s. And after Rocko ended, which Stephen Hillenburg was the executive producer of the last season, Steve was told to do another show about talking animals, and that's how SpongeBob came to be. But there were a lot of things in this original pilot episode that didn't really stick around, like Gary, who is very high here. Gary was originally meant to eat a cactus, and that was supposed to be his thing alongside meowing. But I think Nickelodeon executives didn't want kids to eat cacti. Another thing that got into this episode, but not many else, is Squidward's house has bamboo sticks by its sides, and yeah, I'm fine with Squidward's house being vanilla. It doesn't need any more eccentricity, and SpongeBob lifting weights and being a weak, wimpy, that has stuck around, and I'm glad it has because this scene is excellent. SpongeBob's catchphrase is "I'm ready," which is very simple, very straightforward. It isn't anything like super fancy. It's just "I'm ready." That kind of shows his go-get-em attitude, and I couldn't have it any other way. In general, SpongeBob acts a bit differently here than he would in other episodes. He seems a little bit smarter, a little bit more weird and goofy in other ways. It's very hard to describe. I think the design does a lot of the talking for me because it has got a little bit of that Rocco influence. You have, like, the eyes and the general shape are a little different from how it would be when the show eventually gets picked up. And this scene with Patrick, this scene is excellent because you never get anything like this with Patrick ever again. You get it every once in a while, but Patrick is pretty wise here. That's kind of hard to believe, that Patrick was wise in the pilot episode. That is one of those things that they gradually change over the course of the years just to make characters more interesting, and this is pretty good Patrick. Like, yes, you can still tell it's him. He's fat, he's dopey, he can't finish his sentences. Relatable, am I right? But yeah, it is good, it's very weird, and I like seeing it again whenever I pop this episode back in. It's fun. And this is the first we get of Squidward, a good establishing character moment of him, like, very worried about SpongeBob ruining his life, again, and here's Mr. Krabs stiffing money, and I'll just talk about what they add to this. Squidward and Mr. Krabs aren't really as developed here, even in strange ways as SpongeBob and Patrick were, because I feel like they were still working out the kinks with the title characters and who they wanted to be the most childish ones, and Squidward and Mr. Krabs were authoritarian characters from the very first draft, so I can see why they're pretty much standing here for about a minute, just kind of working out ways to get the SpongeBob to shoo away from them. And that's kind of... it is a bit bland, but the pilot, it's a pilot. This joke kills me. But it's a pilot episode, and I'm fine with a couple flaws here and there, because I'm more used to the general season 1 attitude compared to the pilot, and this is a pretty underrated thing in the whole series. On the flip side of quality, SpongeBob getting us to find a hydrodynamic spatula, like the strangest thing you can think of, because that is just, you think of a spatula, you don't really think about any other parts that it'd need, and this joke has a very great punchline. Here we get their iconic laughs. I think that's the most developed they get, besides just being standing there and being tossed around by anchovies. And this is one of the things that people really remember this pilot episode for, the anchovies, and also Mr. Krabs' description of them. And yeah, anchovies really do smell, but that's because they put them in like this really weird vinegar when you get them in cans at the store. It's... The anchovy infestation thing is very fun. It leads to a lot of really cool wave effects that you really want to show off in an animated pilot, because you really want to show that you are good at animation. You see here. And Steve really was. He made a lot of the best episodes of Rocco, and these anchovies making whole scenes with the character done en masse, that is going to really wow an executive if you're selling you a show to a network. And that is, here we get the first glimpse of Bargain Mart, and then another scene inside it a little later. Bargain Mart isn't used often in the show. The only other time that really pops to mind is Party Pooper Pants, and maybe Squirrel Jokes, but that might just be a general convenience store, I forget. But yeah, Bargain Mart, very underrated location. They don't use it often. It actually hasn't changed a bit when I look at this compared to Party Pooper Pants. And here we reach a definite climax. Somehow a lot of the anchovies are turning into water. I know it's cartoonish exaggeration, but yeah, it's really weird. But I love it. It's real escalation. Steve knew how to tell a good story, and so did Derek and Tim. And here we get SpongeBob saving the day with that hydrodynamic spatula with port and starboard attachments and turbo drive. They only had one in stock. That joke kills me every time I go back to this episode, that they only had one in stock, because it shouldn't exist. And after this we get, well, SpongeBob isn't singing it, he's sort of working to it, somehow making good Krabby Patties, but he works to the 1968 song by Tiny Tim, Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight, and this is probably the most iconic thing, one of the most iconic things from season 1, but this is what the pilot is known for, because this is why it wasn't on DVD for a long time. Like, it wasn't on the complete first season set in 2003. One of the few DVDs you can watch this on is the season 3 collection from 2005, because there were rights issues with the song. Like, that's a bunch of cheapskates, but that is a very fun sequence, and there, I often do that, put a smiley face on my burger with the different condiments. It's a very optimistic thing to do if you're going to be in this sort of job. There's a red-tied SpongeBob, or like red collar, and there's a white collar SpongeBob. The red collar only appears a couple times in this pilot episode. It's a little bit of an animation flaw that they ironed out, and now SpongeBob is officially the fry cook for the Krusty Krab, where he'll be for 20 years. And this is where he'll stay until he's old and grey. That's lyrics from the Tiny Tim song. And lastly, we have Patrick just to round out and show that this might still be a safe place to eat. Oh, there goes SpongeBob. So yeah, I really like this pilot episode, Help Wanted. It's not one of my favorites, but I enjoy it all the same. It is definitely the very first time they tried to do something with these characters, this location, Bikini Bottom, and it was successful. I like this episode. On to Reef-Blower, which didn't have the exact same writers, but they're credited as in the credits. It's mostly the work of storyboard artists, because this is a very story-driven short. It has the same sort of hallmarks as a silent cartoon, where there is no dialogue, it's all in acting and locational acting, you know what I mean. But that means that it isn't one of my go-to season 1 episodes, because you don't really get a lot of like great jokes with it. Like, you get a lot of really good visual gags, but dialogue is a big part of SpongeBob's humor, and to see that removed, even if accidentally, theoretically, it does sort of weaken the experience, at least in my opinion. People who love visual gags, they're gonna find this to be a laugh riot. And funny story, there are rumors that the reason this was a silent short episode is because the sound equipment when they were recording mucked up, and I just don't believe that, because if you're going to record this far into... Here's the thing. First of all, you hear Squidward grumble at some point, so I feel like the silent thing was intentional. And second, if this were an accidentally silent production, then they wouldn't... Sorry, I'm stuttering a bit. You can tell this is my first commentary. Okay, but this is my favorite visual gag in this episode. SpongeBob's really large hands when he gets the dust and metal back in. Sand, sorry. But they would have recorded on another day if the equipment was out. Like, this was the 26th episode in production order, maybe 27th. Like, this was a little over halfway through season 1, so, like, in terms of production, like, they added this in very close to the episode's airing so that Help Wanted wouldn't be overly short, because this was around a time when Nickelodeon was very careful about its, like, time slots. And this is the first time that the ocean's completely sucked up, and Squidward is for some reason purplish pink. I guess that was sort of like a visual thing to show that this is not underwater, but yeah, that's the end of Reef-Blower. I had only one major thing to talk about, but this episode's okay. It's got a couple good things going for it. Moving on to Tea at the Treedome, which is the third to air. It's not often that 3 episodes air as a premiere. This was written by Peter Burns, Mr. Lawrence, and Paul Tibbett, as it just said, and this episode introduces a lot of things. Clams, jellyfish, Sandy, SpongeBob wearing jellyfishing glasses, and yeah, it's a very introductory episode. Ooh, SpongeBob looks off-model there. So this is the first time we see SpongeBob out for jellyfish. He almost catches a blue jellyfish, and we'll see why this is important towards the end of Season 2. This was before, I think, they decided that green jellyfish would contrast better with the blue sky, or mostly blue sky. And this is where we first see Sandy, in action. She was always meant to be a bit of an action girl for the show, and she works. She isn't, like, horribly pretentious. This is still, like, 90s action, where it's fun to see different kinds of people and different kinds of scenarios, and I like how SpongeBob is just standing here thinking, where have I seen this before? And not really going to help until it's a little too late. Weird he'd have a field guide for land squirrels when he's a sea creature, and doesn't know what air is at this point, but I can forgive that. Overall, after this, he enters the foray, and it becomes a pretty good fight scene. Not one of the show's best. Like, in general, SpongeBob fight scenes are a little more intense than this, but this is a good introduction to the sort of action you'll see from the show, because it's a very laugh-heavy show, but you get a lot of action scenes from time to time. But this has one of my favorite jokes of the episode. Still makes me, like, very happy to hear. And here we see SpongeBob falling into what I think is meant to be an actual sponge. Like, I think that was just something Steve threw in as sort of like this is what he's meant to be, but nobody really got it. And what this fight scene does well compared to others is, like, introduce a new style, and this is where both SpongeBob and Sandy meet and start bonding over karate, which eventually they will play very often, or just fight each other very often using karate moves. I don't know how SpongeBob cares about karate at this point. It's just another little bit of eccentricity, I guess. But Sandy, very energetic, very strong. I can dig that. I mean, SpongeBob, if you see there, he's mostly just doing all these advanced techniques for leisure. This rock scene, not one of my favorites, but it does prove, like, a point about Sandy. Yeah, an intense ending. And that smile is very Hutchinson-esque. Shows that Steve still wasn't 100% out of a Rocco mindset with episodes like this, because some parts of this get very unsettling. Like, after SpongeBob actually enters the eponymous Treedome, he starts to dehydrate because he's a generally water-based creature, and this is where they set that sort of thing up, that SpongeBob doesn't really understand what air is, meeting an air creature like us and Sandy. Patrick doesn't either, so it's not like he's... That's also very off-model. This was the first episode in official production order after Help Wanted, and that is a very detailed map. No, seriously, if you got handed that map... Anyways, there are a lot of, little issues with SpongeBob's design here. He goes off-model at points, and there are a few other things that really don't appear again, like Patrick's glasses. I'd actually say that this has just as many, little eccentricities in its art style as Help Wanted did, because then you get to Bubble Stand and Boating School. Those are the super early episodes, and a lot of this sort of stuff is ironed out, and here's a little joke about fanciness. Patrick telling him that you have to put your pinky up to look fancy, and that works at diners, not really on dates. But he's putting in the effort. This is still wise Patrick. And we get this a few times in Season 1. In general, they bounce around a lot with Patrick's characterization this early on in the series, and it's very interesting, but he's not one of the most reliable characters this season. In 2 and 3, definitely, but here we go. SpongeBob discovers what air is the hard way, and those flowers, wilting. That's a good little visual gag. Like this arm twisting I could do without, but yeah. I've seen a couple criticisms of this episode saying that it is very gross and disturbing, and yeah, if you want to look at it that way, then this sort of gross and disturbing stuff has been in the show since day one. I say that as we get a beautiful butterfly shot, right here. And am I the only one who thinks that Sandy's general interior, land outfit is a little bit revealing for today's standards? I get it, she's a cartoon character, but I don't think Nickelodeon would allow that to be someone's general character design today. And I'm not trying to be an SJW or anything, I'm just pointing something out. And here SpongeBob's eyes shrink a bit, and this is what he's like for most of the rest of the episode, so if you don't like that, I can't blame you for not liking this episode. I do kind of like just how weird and sick it gets. It's got a bit of that Ren and Stimpy and Rocco charm. This was still around that era. It's not like they're doing these things without really knowing how they worked and how to escalate them. Splinter. SpongeBob's design in here, in the Treedome, goes a bit all over the place. His eyes perk up again at certain points, here. I don't know if this is just because the small eyes are a silly face earlier on, something in a storyboard that just went over the top. In general, the storyboards for these older episodes are still coming out, so maybe I'll have more to say about storyboard to final. And that right there is Sandy's bird that only appears in this episode. There was also a scallop in SpongeBob's house in Help Wanted. I guess an early trend in these sort of very early episodes was, I don't know, just having one-off pets, or pets that don't really do much. But Sandy has a lot of pets come wormy, so maybe this was setting something up, and yes, SpongeBob gets a teeny bit uglier. And SpongeBob's very dry voice at this point is what keeps me invested, because it is kind of fun to see Tom Kenny, only 3 episodes in, 2 that have been recording-based, and he's already having fun with SpongeBob's voice. It does sound very un-SpongeBob-like, but I can live with that. And here we set up one of the best things about this episode, the vase. Oh god, the vase. And there's also one of the weaker things in this episode that becomes more present as it goes on, Patrick's role, which is a bit hit or miss, because you get Patrick not really understanding air, but at the same time he's just a reminder of how much better he's going than SpongeBob by just standing outside and not really risking anything. That's just my way of looking at it. Like, he's not a broken character in this episode, but he could have been, like, a little more aware of what's going on. Because SpongeBob is suffering really hard at this point. I mean, I like his suffering. Like, it's better than how he often gets off scot-free these days, but gosh, these scenes are so intense. Like, these shots of the vase and SpongeBob's, like, very static reaction to them. Like, he doesn't move very much from this point on, like, until he says he needs it, and this is still one of the most iconic scenes in the series for a reason. It's very dramatic. Like, you get that shot and a few gross close-ups of SpongeBob's eyes as he sweats, really thinking about how much he wants that, and then this very outward shot, and he shouts. That's good escalation. That is genuinely good comedy, and I'm glad that they set up that these are the sort of jokes that the show would have, because that is a classic. I still see that on social media at points when people really want to buy something or go see something, and SpongeBob's design looks normal there. Gosh, like, when you're watching these episodes in HD, a lot of those little distracting animation errors are a lot more noticeable than if you're watching on a 90s CRT. And here, at least Patrick gets what he deserves, technically, by realizing that air ain't what it's cracked up to be. What I find interesting is that Patrick doesn't really get a new, like, model or a new design when he goes in. They just sort of play around with the top of his head. I guess because they didn't want to make up a new model sheet or have two characters with shrinking eyes and decaying, like, orifices. I know I shouldn't say that with SpongeBob's holes, but that's what they are. And here we get some live action. There was a bit in Help Wanted, but here's one of the first cases where it's the real shock, and that is SpongeBob and Patrick's quote-unquote corpses. And it kind of shows how live action is a bit uncanny, but it's going to work with this show. And here we have the introduction of the water helmets that they use when going into Sandy's Treedome because they can't breathe the air, as they learn from this episode. That is really cool that they put something in that the characters are going to have to learn as the series goes on. Like, that is the way to cap off an introductory episode with very cold tea, it seems. That's kind of yuck, but overall I like this episode. Not as much as Help Wanted, but more than Reef-Blower. And in a way, that's a good way to cap off the first episode of SpongeBob. 3 very iconic episodes, even if I don't like Reef-Blower that much. They're all very good at introducing the themes and the ideas that are going to be in SpongeBob for the rest of its over 20-year run now, because there are still a lot of Season 12 episodes that haven't aired yet, and I'm going to be here till the end, baby. I love this show, and I am just going to keep on watching until I stop making episodes, even if I want them to stop making episodes very, very soon. But even if everything goes to crap by the end, I'm very glad that the show had a very strong start and that these were around. So see you in July for another big round of SpongeComs as the show starts airing weekly. This was just for a sneak peek after the end of the Kids' Choice Awards. Goodbye for now.